Hello everyone, welcome to the really interesting session of credentials, signatures and sign-on. Our first talk is from Thomas Gross from Newcastle University, and you can see the title, Thomas Gross.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this talk on Simply Tell Me How on the perceived trustworthiness and technology acceptance of anonymous credential schemes. Now the big question for this talk is, quo vadis anonymous credentials, attribute-based credentials, how are we doing in terms of adoption? And some of you have been around for quite some while in that topic. We had a lot of valiant efforts to develop anonymous credentials, attribute-based credentials, and they're quite a mature technology these days. So you had Identity Mixer in the beginning, you had UProof, you had the effort in ILMA cards to develop that, you had massive European Union projects like Prime Life or ABC for Trust, and more recently, first adoption in similar technologies like in Privacy Pass or in technologies transferred to Signal. So in some sense, there has been a lot of effort in the community to make this work. And I would have been the first one 15 years ago to tell you anonymous credentials, attribute-based credentials will be pervasive and we will be using them everywhere. However, that's not quite how adoption worked out. So instead of these systems having pervaded technology and user behavior, we are still working on that. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Building these ecosystems is complex. Getting the buy-in of identity providers, of service providers is another problem. But for today, we're focusing on, so what is going on for the user? What decisions are users making in adopting these systems, and what is driving those decisions? So before I start for real, I would like to call out two kinds of works of some of our colleagues. The first one by Zenaida Benenson and her colleagues who investigated anonymous credentials schemes at the time on a smart card at Patras University. What we had here was really good ecological validity, so you had actual cards in the game that students could use. However, it was a small sample and they could only go into correlation analysis. Another line of efforts was by David Hubbard and Sebastian Papen, who investigated not credential systems as such, but Jondonym and Tor as privacy-enhancing technologies. And they worked with actual users, so typically having 140 anonymous users involved who actually use pets out there, and they did a partially square structural equation model explaining 42% of the variance in their models. So what we have seen from this prior work is that the technology acceptance model as a framework that has been used a lot in economics is actually quite a good foundation to look at attribute-based credential schemes. So our topic for today, the aim is, how can we model technology acceptance and perceived trustworthiness in terms of how users make the decision to use these systems? And secondly, we want to go further than what has been done before, which means we are constructing a true experiment in which we are manipulating conditions to investigate to what extent certain factors influence user behavior. And the first one is intrinsic properties, so that's properties of the credential system itself and its provider. And then we have presentation properties, which are talking about how are we conveying this information to the users. Now, the model we have created as an hypothesis is shown on the screen now. So basically, we started from the beginning in hypothesizing that this is how all of this will work. So you have the core of the technology acceptance model on the right-hand side, which basically says that usefulness and ease of use determine the intention to use the system. And as in earlier research, we have distinguished usefulness for primary tasks, so that is what the user actually wants to achieve, reading the emails, browsing the web, getting the job done, and the secondary task, which in our case is privacy usefulness. Now, we considered attitudes and subjective norms, and in that realm, the most important point for our conversation today is privacy concerns. So to what extent do privacy concerns influence user decision making? Then the major antecedent of usefulness is perceived trustworthiness, so do they actually trust the system to use it? And then two novelties we introduced in this kind of model are facilitating conditions, which means whether users have some knowledge and resources to actually make the system work, to make it run. And the second one is what's called results demonstrability, which entails whether the user can explain to others, or believes that the user can explain to others, what the results of the system are and what the consequences of using it will be. So how did we do this? I will spare you a lot of details in terms of statistical modeling and just look at the experiment itself. So what we have here is a mock-up intervention. Basically, we've created a website where people could browse and inform themselves about attribute-based credential schemes, which contained a range of pages, contained an opportunity with a download link, and the instruction for the users was to just read through that, get an opinion, and go about their business in the survey later. Now, what we have done here is we manipulated this web page into 24 different pages that are changing either the intrinsic properties, so who is the provider, this could be IBM, this could be a university, this could be a government, how is the usage and the benefits outlined for the users, and presentation properties in terms of how complex is the language we're using. Are we using technical jargon, or are we using really easy to understand language, basically made for school children? Are there people present on the page endorsing that and hosting the system? And is there a support infrastructure? And the latter two are basically factors that have been investigated earlier as aspects boosting users' trust in systems. So we went about exposing the users to all of those different variations of web pages and had a study structured like this. So we asked a lot of questions in advance about demographics, attitudes, subjective norms. We got them to inspect the web pages, which typically took a quarter of an hour. Then we measured different aspects in the self-report questionnaire, where also the questionnaires we used were validated in advance. And finally, we go into manipulation checks and debriefing. So, what did we get from this? The first thing that I'd like to point out is the sample we have obtained. We were sampling on Prolific, so that's a sampling service provider, where we asked Prolific to stratify the sample. So basically, Prolific creates strata with certain properties, so age, ethnicity, gender, and then users self-select whether they want to participate or not. So it's not a truly random stratified selection, but we have some advantage in how the sample is distributed. Overall, after refinement, we got 812 participants. So this is the largest study that has been attempted in this realm so far. And what we got is the following. We created a structural equation modeling which represents user decision making really well. I won't go in all the details, but for people who do statistical modeling, Ramsey of 0.05 is actually very good, and we explain 83% of the variance. So the model really well explains what users are doing. What you have here as a model are on the top corona, the privacy concerned properties and technology affinity in some ways. You see the usefulness, impact on behavior intention here, and you see ease of use. And I'm just pulling out a few things to make a point. The first thing is that primary usefulness, so how useful the user still perceives this tool for what he actually wants to achieve, is king. So that has the strongest impact on behavior intention. The second thing is, if you're looking at drivers that are kind of the root of a lot of decision making, two are standing out. One is facilitating conditions, which means that the user finds that they can find support and knowledge to actually run the system. And secondly, results demonstrability. So those effects are carrying through ease of use, through usefulness to eventually influence the behavioral intention to use the system. So in the paper you find a lot more details about the model and insights to gain from that, but these are just some things I'm pulling out. So 3 lessons learned. First, never impede the primary task of the user. So learn what the user wants to achieve with the system, design the attribute-based credential system to support that, and do not get in the way. So that's really important, because usefulness mediates anything else in terms of privacy concern down the line. Second, help users run and understand the ACS, which means create the conditions that they can learn what's actually going on and how to run the system, make it compatible and help them, and enable understanding in terms of what are the results here, what are the consequences, what are the benefits. So all of that will have an impact. And finally, make it simple. Use simple language, easy to read, and then add some scaffolding in terms of technical content such that they can gain additional trustworthiness from that. So finally, what we have here is an extended technology acceptance model, which explains user decision making extremely well. As far as I know, that's the best fitting model we ever had, and it could be used in other cases. The message here is simply tell me how, facilitate use and understanding, and keep it simple. And finally, if you want to geek out on how to do the structured equation modeling, mediation analysis, all of that stuff, look at the paper. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to take questions.
Any questions from the audience?
Please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this extended model, very exciting. I was wondering, how did you verify that they actually understood the text? Because I think you had one measurement where it's about how well they think it kind of protects, like response efficacy, so to speak, but how can you make sure they actually understood?
A very good question.
What you
So we had what we call a factual manipulation check, which basically asks the user questions about what they have read. And by that we could trace whether they have actually read the content and clocked what was in there. Yeah? So that was our measurements that they actually did the task. What's going in the model, however, is the, and that's part of a standardized questionnaire, is their impression how well they understand this. So it's not about, what knowledge does the user actually have, but what influences the user's decision is how much do they believe they get it. Other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker then again.